To fly and land on lakes, you don't need a seaplane rating, do you? I mean, a lake isn't a sea. Well, I'm just saying. Let's find out in the hangar. Hello and welcome to In the Hangar. I'm Dan Milliken.
And I'm Christy Wong, and you are a dork. Today's episode is brought to you by our awesome sponsors, Colton Mortgage and...
Flying Eyes. They'd make me look not like a dork. Please.
All right, you said something about a seaplane. This is relevant to my interest. I love seaplanes.
And it's on my bucket list to get the seaplane rating. I guess probably every pilot has that, but I really mean it sometime.
Well, I actually went and flew seaplanes. We'll talk about that.
Okay, yeah,
But let's talk to
I have
somebody-
not flown a seaplane yet.
Well, let's talk to somebody who's got a lot of experience flying seaplanes.
All right, we have with us Ken Wittekiend. Ken, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure, Dan.
And you are like Mr. Seaplane. And,
Wait, is it seaplane or is it floatplane?
Is it?
It's both.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, it's
good.
interchangeable.
But not
it's
lake
a
plane.
seaplane rating.
But it's not a lake plane.
It's not a lake plane, but there are lake seaplanes. Is that confusing?
So not
Do you
every...
have to get a lake rating?
I was going to say.
Actually, you don't, but you should.
There is a lake rating?
Well, the lake aircraft, the Buccaneers and those flying hull type seaplanes are a different beast. And even though a seaplane rating in a conventional float plane allows you to fly boat-hulled seaplanes, they are different enough that there really almost should be a separate rating for them. But certainly you should get additional training before you swap from one to the other.
I think you need additional training just to figure out what is a seaplane rating and
like
lakes
that.
and seas and...
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, great. All right, well, before we do jump into the rating and also the advantages and the beauty of float planes, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into float planes.
Well, it was almost serendipitous. A friend of mine had a float plane, had done a bunch of flying, and unfortunately had an accident, not in the float plane, and passed away. And his widow put the airplane up for sale. And I was interested. I had done a bit of float plane flying, and I thought this was something in our part of the world might be of interest to aviators. So I went ahead and bought the airplane, and we set up a training operation to teach people to fly floats on the lakes in central Texas.
What kind of airplane was it?
It was a PA-12, a Piper Super Cruiser,
Okay.
on amphibious floats.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so you set up the training operation. Tell me, as somebody, I do not know what it's going to cost me and how much time it's going to cost me to get my seaplane rating. Walk me through that.
Sure. The rating is normally done over about 3 or 4 days. It
not
normally
bad.
takes somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 hours of training.
So like a tail wheel, just about.
Except that with the tail wheel, it's just an endorsement.
Right.
With-
Oh, that's right. You need a check ride.
Yeah,
for
you actually have to take a check ride with the FAA, and you get an airplane single engine C
Right.
rating added to your pilot certificate.
Now, what's interesting is that, for example, if I were to get my commercial seaplane, I'm automatically a seaplane CFI because I have my airplane single engine like flight instructor. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you think about that, somebody goes and maybe in 6 hours gets a seaplane rating. If they happen to be an instructor, they could turn around the next day and begin to teach.
There you go, Dan. I'll teach you.
Oh, that's okay. Hey, I'll teach you. I'm a CFI. So
Forgot about that.
yeah, many people do, I guess. So, okay. All right, so what does the cost look like now that we know the time?
When we were doing it, it was about $2,000,
Okay.
start to finish. And that includes the ground training, the aircraft rental, the instructor.
Check ride?
Usually not. Usually the check ride fee is paid directly to the DPE that does the test.
Okay, so for the check ride then, I know that private pilots fall into like, the 500, 600, 700, I don't know nowadays. I mean, I paid $400, but that was 6 years ago. And I know all the way up to like a CFI full day is $1,100, $1,200.
Yeah.
What is a DPE charge for a seaplane rating?
Around $700 is probably.
Okay, so a little bit more than the private.
Could be. I mean, again, it depends a little bit on where you go and
Right, sure.
different
And,
parts of
yeah.
the country. The
And-
rates are higher or
And
lower.
what goes into that seaplane check ride?
Well, remember, all your testing is just the additional maneuvers that are specific to the seaplane.
Okay.
So you're not doing all of the things that a regular private pilot practical test would include. So you're going to do all the various forms of water takeoffs and landings. That's a lot of it. And then the other thing that is built into that is different is water handling. And you probably remember from your instruction and flying the float plane that once you get the thing on the water, it's a different animal because it has no brakes, for one thing.
Right.
Yeah, that
So-
was interesting.
So when you learn things like how to sail, so that you actually can sail the airplane backwards and change direction, beaching, docking, skills of those types are quite different. And of course, they don't have any similar type of maneuvers that you do in a land airplane. So that's different for people. However, if people have any kind of boating background or experience, then it translates quite well.
Oh, good. I do have a little bit. So,
So,
okay.
and I just want to clarify, I don't have my seaplane rating yet, but
Okay.
Kevin and I went to Alaska last year, and we actually found a place up there in Talkeetna
Yeah.
that does seaplane instruction. And so we literally just drove up there and it was like, hey, yeah, do you guys do discovery flights?
But Kevin has a seaplane.
Kevin does.
And does he fly a lot of seaplanes?
No.
Okay, is that pretty normal?
It is. Most people see it as just an adventure to go do. They know they have no practical use and they're probably not going to regularly be able to fly float planes. But it's such fun and it's a challenge and it's easy. Typically, like I say, 3 or 4 days and you're done. So a lot of people just do it for the experience.
All right, I'm from Austin,
Uh-huh.
so I grew up around those lakes that you set
Right.
up your training,
Right.
and they're pretty, no doubt. But you've been up into some other areas with the float plane activity. Tell us about that.
Well, summer before last, I had the opportunity. I owned a 182 amphibious float plane, and I had visited Alaska. In fact, I'd gone up to the same place where you were in Talkeetna and done some flying up there several years earlier. And I'd always wanted to go back to the southeast part of Alaska because it's just endless water, stunningly beautiful. And there are remote cabins that are available for rent, and they're only accessible by float plane. So I had this dream of taking this amphibious float plane and flying up into the wilderness of the Tongass National Forest. And so that summer I did. And then once I got the airplane up there, and there were a number of issues and stories along the way to get there, but once there, I had a number of friends and family fly up commercially and meet me in either Juneau or in Ketchikan. And then we would go out and spend a week out in the wilderness in the float plane.
Oh,
And then
okay. Hang on. I got a new bucket list item. Okay, float trip to Alaska. Okay, got it. All right, let's change the tone a little bit here.
Sure.
I know of some cases and situations. You see it on YouTube and on the internet all the time. Some horrible things. You see. I know of somebody who died because they had their landing gear on their float plane down when
Yeah.
they're supposed to have it retract. And then the guy a couple years ago at AirVenture who took off even though everybody told him, please don't. You know which one I'm talking about?
I'm not sure. Dan.
He had some water already gained in one of his floats. The wind was up, the waves were, and he ended up killing himself.
Okay, no, I don't remember that one.
Okay, but anyway, let's talk about the dangers of float
Yeah.
plane.
Well, the big one for amphibious float planes is exactly what you said.
Oh, okay. Wait a minute.
Okay.
Amphibious float. I don't know. Float plane is a thing with floats on the bottom.
Right. So
I don't know the
A
difference.
conventional seaplane or float plane would not have any other way to land except on the water.
Okay.
The more useful construction is to have amphibious floats where retractable landing gear
Okay.
are built into the floats. So now you can land either on the land or in the water. The risk that involves is exactly to your point, and that is in the event the pilot messes up and forgets to retract the wheels and makes a water landing, the airplane will violently turn upside down. And in about half the wrecks where that happens, it turns out to be fatal.
Are there any kind of devices on these float planes that warn the pilot that their gear is still down?
Yes, there are
But they just-
a number of systems, but and there are a lot of different ways that the scenarios happen, but the typical one is you come off of a runway and you go to land immediately into the water. and you just, because you're out of a normal routine, you just forget, and you don't retract the wheels. So that really is a bad wreck when that happens.
Okay, and then what about like choppy water and, you start porpoising?
Yeah, you know, there are limitations that are, as you would expect, just like there are in flying land airplanes in terms of things you should or should not do. Rough water can be one. The other hazard would be debris in the water. If you didn't know there was something and you happened to hit it with the float, you could easily knock a hole in the float and end up sinking the float and maybe even sinking the airplane. Wow. So it really is very much like landing off airport in a land airplane. You really do find the situation or the condition of the water to be different day to day. Different wind, possibility of things floating in the water, rocks underneath the surface that you can't see. So you have to be very thoughtful and careful to survey the area before you go to land.
So on your 180, it's an amphibious?
Yes, it
Okay,
is.
so when you flew it across country, I bet that was you flew it up to Alaska from Texas.
I did.
That would be quite
At a whopping 105 knots the whole way.
Hey, those are warrior speeds. I'm okay with that. Okay, do you have any scary stories from your float plane days? Were there any situations that was like, I do not want to do this again?
Well, the thing that happens in southeast Alaska is weather is miserably bad most of the time. And the summer that I was there, it was extraordinarily bad. It was, I think, the second wettest season they'd had in recorded history. So you have lots and lots of days where you're basically operating at 500 feet, but you're over the water, so you can land really almost anywhere. But still, you're only 500 feet above, and there's a lot of really high terrain. So it can be quite challenging. You can go from being in relatively safe conditions and get into the clouds and inadvertent IMC kind of things very easily. So you have to be very careful in planning, and you have to be patient. You get into the lakes up there, and you may get trapped by weather, and you may be there for several days. We spent several days in one cabin while it was pouring down rain because it just wasn't possible to leave. So you just can't let that urgency to get back to town cause you to do things you shouldn't do. That's the biggest risk up there is, in addition to the fact that it's very remote and help is a long way away, the weather is just variable and usually not great.
And there are no RNAV approaches into lakes, are there?
No, there aren't. And in fact, if you have terrain warning on the system, you have to be able to disable it because it does not understand when you go to land in the lake that you're not on a runway, and it really lets you know. It's telling you, whoop, whoop, pull up. And you're no, we're landing in the water.
All right, let's talk about float plane ownership.
Sure.
What's the difference between owning a 180 and owning a 180 on floats?
There's not a huge difference. There are inspections that are unique to the float part of the package. And so when you do an annual, they have to be inspected. And, they live a hard life. And so the maintenance on floats needs to be carefully looked after. You can have, for example, problems where the pounding of the water will cause leakage in the floats. And so sometimes you have to go in and do sealing of those. And then with the gear system, again, you want to make sure that all of that is working properly and maintained well. But other than that, it's at the end of the day, it's just an airplane.
Is it much more expensive to insure?
Yes, much more expensive to insure.
Well,
it
there goes
absolutely
my
is.
hopes and dreams.
Because again, if you think about it, a lot of those operations are in situations where it's much less defined. And so the opportunity to do damage is greater than it would be if you were constantly landing on improved runways.
Well, there goes my warrior on floats idea.
Yeah, that would be interesting. An amphib long warrior.
I have seen a Cherokee on floats before.
I've seen 206s, but not 210s with the retractable gear. That's kind of difficult. So, well, very cool. I'm still very fired up to get a seaplane rating and land on lakes.
We should do that.
We should do that. Well, Ken, thank you so much
Absolutely.
for coming and sharing with us.
It's my pleasure, Dan. Christy, good to
Ken.
see you.
Good to see you.
All right, and good to see you guys. Thanks for watching. And if you like it, hit the like button, share, subscribe, and we appreciate you guys. We'll see you next time.
In the hangar.